The woman standing in the doorway of the general store looked like she had walked through hell itself, and Gideon Shaw could tell, just by the way she held her shoulders, that she expected to walk through it again before the day was done. It was the spring of 1878 in Hecla, Montana Territory, and the mountain town was still shaking off the brutal winter that had buried it under 10 feet of snow for 3 straight months. Gideon had come down from his cabin in the Tobacco Root Mountains for the first time since November, his beard grown wild and his patience for civilization worn thin. He had planned to buy supplies, maybe a bottle of whiskey if the store had anything decent, and then disappear back into the high country where things made sense, where silence was a companion instead of an enemy, where he did not have to pretend that life had not taken everything from him 5 years ago when his wife and infant son died of fever in a single terrible week. The woman was perhaps 23 or 24, with dark blonde hair that hung in a simple braid down her back. Her dress was worn but clean, patched in places with fabric that did not quite match. Her eyes were the color of winter ice on a mountain lake, pale blue and guarded. She clutched a small drawstring bag in her hands, and when the storekeeper told her the price of flour, she flinched. "That is too much," she said quietly. "Last month it was half that." "Last month the pass was snowed in," the storekeeper replied, not unkindly. "Had to bring everything up from Bud at twice the cost. Price is the price." Gideon watched as she counted out coins from her bag with careful precision. Her hands were work-worn, the nails cut short, the kind of hands that knew labor intimately. When she finished counting, her face fell. "I am short," she whispered. "I am sorry, I thought I had enough." "How short?" the storekeeper asked. 30 cents. The storekeeper shook his head. "Cannot do it. I have got my own bills to pay." Gideon found himself stepping forward before his brain caught up with his body. "Add it to my order," he said, dropping a silver dollar on the counter. "And get her whatever else she needs within reason." The woman turned to him, her eyes wide with surprise and something that looked like shame. "I cannot accept that." "You can and you will," Gideon said. His voice came out rougher than he intended, months of disuse making it sound like gravel rolling down a mountainside. "No sense in arguing about it." "I do not take charity," she said, lifting her chin. There was pride there, fierce and bright despite her obvious poverty. "Good thing I am not offering charity then," Gideon replied. "I am making an investment. You look like someone who pays her debts." "I am." She paused, searching his face as if trying to determine whether he was mocking her. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she gave a short nod. "I will pay you back." "I believe you will." He turned to the storekeeper. "Get her the flour and anything else she came for." The woman hesitated, then added salt and a small package of dried beans to her order. Gideon noticed she did not add sugar or coffee or any of the other small luxuries that made frontier life bearable. She took only what was essential for survival. When the transaction was complete and Gideon had ordered his own supplies to be loaded onto his pack mule, he found the woman waiting for him outside the store. The spring sunshine was weak but welcome after the long winter, and it caught the gold threads in her hair. "Thank you," she said. "I mean that sincerely. I will bring the money to town next month." "What is your name?" Gideon asked. "Laura Mason." She shifted the bag of flour in her arms. "And you are?" "Gideon Shaw. I have a cabin up in the Tobacco Roots about 12 miles northeast of here." "I know the area." Laura glanced up at the mountains, their peaks still white with snow. "I have a claim up Ramshorn Creek. Small place. I am trying to work it myself." That explained the work-worn hands and the careful spending. Mining claims were brutal work for a man with help, nearly impossible for a woman alone. Gideon found himself curious despite his general policy of staying out of other people's business. Yourself. No husband or family. No. The single word was final, a door slamming shut. Then, as if she felt she owed him some explanation after his kindness, she added, "My father died last winter. Pneumonia. It was just the two of us working the claim. I stayed on because I have nowhere else to go, and the claim is all I have in this world. I am sorry for your loss. Thank you." Laura shifted the flower again, and Gideon realized it was probably heavier than she wanted to admit. "I should get back. It is a long walk. You walked 12 miles to town, closer to 10 from my claim, and I will walk back the same way." She said it matter-of-factly, as if hiking 20 miles round trip through mountain country was nothing remarkable. Gideon looked at the sun, calculating. "You will not make it back before dark if you leave now. The trail is still muddy from snowmelt and there are washouts along Ramshorn Creek. I have walked in the dark before." Laura started to turn away, clearly done with the conversation. "Wait." Gideon surprised himself again. He had not had a real conversation with another human being in months, had not wanted one, and here he was prolonging an encounter with a stranger. "I am headed that direction. I can carry your supplies on my mule and make sure you get home safe." "That is not necessary." "Maybe not, but I am offering anyway." When she started to protest again, he added, "Look, Miss Mason, I do not know your whole story and I am not asking to. But I know these mountains, and I know they do not care much about pride or independence. They will kill you just as quick for stubbornness as anything else. Let me help you home. No strings attached." Laura studied him for a long moment. Gideon knew what she saw. A man in his early 30s, tall and lean from hard living, with brown hair that needed cutting and green eyes that had seen too much. His clothes were functional, his boots worn but well made. He carried a rifle with the ease of someone who knew how to use it. He probably looked dangerous, and maybe he was, but apparently Laura decided he was the kind of dangerous that worked in her favor rather than against it. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Gideon, Laura." She allowed herself a small smile, the first he had seen from her, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. They walked in companionable silence for the first hour, following the rutted wagon road that led northeast out of Hecla. The mountains rose around them like the walls of a cathedral, pine-covered and ancient. Snow still clung to the shadowed places, and the creeks ran high and fast with meltwater. Spring was coming late to the high country, as it always did, but there were signs of it everywhere. Green shoots pushing through old pine needles, the tracks of animals emerging from winter dens, the return of birdsong to the forest. Gideon led his mule, a patient old creature named Ulysses, while Laura walked beside him. She had tried to take the bag of flour herself, but he had loaded it onto Ulysses with the rest of his supplies and told her not to argue. She had not. "How long have you been up in these mountains?" Laura asked as they left the main road and turned onto a narrower trail that followed the creek. 5 years, more or less. I built my cabin the summer of '73 and have been there ever since. That is a long time to be alone. I prefer it that way." The words came out sharper than he intended, and he saw Laura flinch slightly. He sighed. "Sorry, I am not used to conversation anymore, tend to forget my manners. It is all right, I understand wanting to be left alone." Laura stepped carefully around a muddy patch in the trail. "My father and I kept to ourselves mostly. He was not much for company after my mother died. That was back in Kansas before we came west. What brought you out here?" "The usual reasons. My father thought we could make our fortune. He heard stories about the gold strikes in Montana and convinced himself we would be rich within a year." Laura's voice was rueful. Turns out mining is harder than the stories make it sound. It usually is. Gideon had known plenty of prospectors in his years in the mountains. Most of them worked themselves to death chasing a dream that never materialized. A few struck it rich. The rest just struck it. "We found some gold," Laura said. "Not much, but enough to keep us going. Enough to make my father believe we would find more if we just kept digging. Then last winter came and he caught pneumonia, and that was that." She paused, looking up at the mountains. "I kept working the claim after he died because I did not know what else to do. Cannot afford to leave, cannot afford to stay, so I just keep digging and hope something changes." "That is a hard way to live." "It is the only way I have." Laura glanced at him. "What about you? Why did you come up here to be alone?" Gideon was quiet for a long time, long enough that he thought Laura might repeat the question or change the subject. But she just walked beside him, patient and undemanding, and eventually he found himself answering. "I had a wife, Margaret, and a son, Samuel. He was 6 months old when the fever came through our town down in Colorado Territory." The words felt rusty, like tools left too long unused. "They both died within 3 days of each other. First Samuel, then Margaret. I buried them side by side and left that same week. Came up to Montana and built my cabin and decided I was done with people, done with caring, done with everything except surviving." "I am so sorry," Laura said quietly. "That is an unbearable loss." "Yes." Gideon swallowed hard. He had not talked about Margaret and Samuel in 5 years, had barely let himself think about them. "It was." They walked in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence, one built on shared grief rather than simple companionship. The trail climbed steadily, winding through stands of lodgepole pine and mountain mahogany. They passed the burned-out remains of an old cabin, and Laura pointed to it, the Morrison place. "They gave up last fall and went back east, said Montana was too hard." "It is too hard," Gideon agreed. "That is why the people who stay are either crazy or stubborn." "Which are you?" "Both, probably." Laura laughed, a bright, unexpected sound that rang through the trees like a bell. Gideon found himself smiling in response, something he had not done in longer than he could remember. They reached Laura's claim as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western peaks. It was a modest setup. A small log cabin that looked like it had been built quickly and cheaply, a sluice box beside the creek, a pile of tailings and various mining equipment scattered around the clearing. Firewood was stacked against one wall of the cabin, and a small vegetable garden had been turned over in preparation for planting. "This is it," Laura said, and Gideon heard both pride and embarrassment in her voice. "Not much, but it is mine." "It is a good spot," Gideon said, and meant it. The cabin was situated on high ground above the creek, safe from flooding. The clearing was large enough to catch good sun but small enough to be defensible. Whoever had chosen the location had known what they were doing. Your father picked well. He knew land, at least. Mining was another story. Laura took the bag of flour from Ulysses and carried it toward the cabin. "Would you like to come inside? I can make coffee. It is the least I can do after you walked me all the way home." Gideon should have said no. Should have helped her unload the supplies, wished her well, and headed back up to his own cabin before full dark. That was what the smart, sensible part of his brain told him to do. But the part of him that had been starved for human connection, the part he had thought was dead and buried with Margaret and Samuel, spoke up instead. "Coffee sounds good," he heard himself say. The inside of the cabin was as modest as the outside, but it was clean and well organized. An iron stove stood in one corner, a narrow bed in another. A rough-hewn table and 2 chairs occupied the center of the single room, and shelves lined one wall, holding dishes, supplies, and a few books. Personal items were few. A daguerreotype of a stern-looking couple who must have been Laura's parents, a pieced quilt on the bed, a pair of men's boots by the door that must have been her father's. Laura set about making coffee with efficient movements while Gideon stood awkwardly by the door, suddenly aware that he was a stranger in this woman's home, that his presence here was unusual and potentially improper. But Laura seemed unbothered by the conventions that would have scandalized a town-dwelling woman. Life in the mountains made its own rules. "Sugar?" she asked, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. "Black is fine." They sat at the table, and Laura wrapped her hands around her cup as if drawing warmth from it. The cabin was cool despite the spring sunshine outside, and Gideon noticed the wood box was nearly empty. "You are running low on firewood," he observed. "I know. I have been meaning to cut more, but between working the claim and keeping everything else running, there are not enough hours in the day." Laura took a sip of her coffee. "I will get to it soon. You cannot survive up here without enough wood. One late spring storm and you will freeze." "I know that," Laura said, and there was an edge to her voice now. "I am not stupid, Mr. Shaw. I am just tired and alone, and trying to do the work of 2 people with the strength of one." Gideon held up his hands in apology. "I did not mean to suggest you were stupid, just concerned." Laura's shoulders sagged. "I am sorry. I did not mean to snap at you. You have been nothing but kind, and here I am biting your head off." She set down her coffee cup and rubbed her eyes. "The truth is I am barely holding on. Every day I tell myself I can make it one more day, and somehow I do. But I do not know how much longer I can keep going like this." "Why stay?" Gideon asked. "If it is this hard, why not sell the claim and go somewhere easier? Because this claim is all I have left of my father. Because I promised him I would make it work. Because I have nowhere else to go and no money to get there if I did." Laura met his eyes. "And because I am stubborn enough to believe that tomorrow might be the day I finally find the big strike that makes it all worthwhile." Gideon understood that kind of stubbornness. It was the same force that had kept him alive through 5 years of solitude, the same refusal to give up that made people survive impossible circumstances. "I will come by tomorrow and cut you some firewood," he said. "Enough to get you through to summer at least. You do not have to do that." "I know I do not have to, I want to." Gideon stood, suddenly needing to leave before he said something else he might regret. "Thank you for the coffee, Laura. I will see you tomorrow." He was out the door before she could protest again, leading Ulysses back onto the trail as the last light faded from the sky. He did not let himself think about why he had just promised to come back, why he had just committed to helping a woman he had met only hours before. He just focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on finding his way home through the gathering darkness. The next morning, Gideon woke before dawn and immediately regretted his promise. What was he thinking? He had spent 5 years avoiding human entanglement, 5 years keeping his heart safely locked away, and now he was going to spend a day doing manual labor for a woman he barely knew. It was foolish. Reckless. Exactly the kind of thing that led to caring, and caring led to pain. But he had given his word, and Gideon Shaw was a man who kept his promises even when they made no sense. So he loaded his axes and saw onto Ulysses, packed some food and coffee, and made the 2-hour trek to Laura's claim. She was already awake when he arrived, working the sluice box by the creek. Her sleeves were rolled up and her skirt was muddy, and she looked up in genuine surprise when she heard him approach. "You came," she said I would. "Most people say a lot of things they do not mean." "I am not most people." Gideon unloaded his tools. "Point me to the best trees and I will get started." They worked through the morning, Laura at her sluice and Gideon felling trees just outside the clearing. It was hard, satisfying work, the kind that made his muscles burn and his mind go quiet. He had forgotten how good it felt to work for someone else, to do something that mattered beyond his own survival. Each tree that fell was one less thing Laura had to worry about, one more small measure of security for her. Around midday, Laura called him to the cabin for a meal. She had made biscuits and beans, simple fare but filling, and they ate in a comfortable silence that surprised Gideon. He had expected awkwardness, the strain of forced conversation, but instead he found he did not need to fill every moment with words. Laura seemed to understand the value of quiet, seemed to exist comfortably in the spaces between sentences. "How much gold are you pulling out of the creek?" he asked when they had finished eating. "Not much. A few dollars a week if I am lucky, barely enough to buy supplies." Laura looked troubled. "I have been thinking maybe I should dig deeper, try to find the vein. But I do not have the equipment for that kind of mining, and I cannot afford to hire anyone to help. Deep mining is dangerous even with proper equipment and experienced men," Gideon said. "Alone, it would be suicide." "Then what do you suggest? Have you thought about trying a different approach? These mountains are full of resources besides gold, timber for instance, or furs, or you could run some cattle if you cleared more land." Laura shook her head. "That all requires money I do not have, and time. And help." She stood abruptly, clearing the dishes with sharp movements. "I know I cannot make this work alone, all right. I know I am fighting a losing battle, but what else can I do? This claim is all I have. If I give it up, I have nothing." Gideon was quiet for a moment, turning over an idea that had been forming in the back of his mind since yesterday. It was crazy. It was exactly the kind of involvement he had sworn to avoid. But looking at Laura, seeing the desperation and determination in her face, he found himself speaking anyway. "What if you had help? I cannot afford to hire anyone. What if you did not have to pay?" Gideon stood, crossing to the window. "What if we partnered up? You have the claim and the water rights. I have experience and equipment and 2 strong hands. We work the claim together, split whatever we find, and help each other survive. You would have help with the heavy work, and I would have a reason to come down from the mountain more often." Laura stared at him. "Why would you do that? You do not know me." "This could be the poorest claim in Montana for all you know. Maybe, but maybe not. And either way, you need help and I am offering." Gideon turned to face her. "Look, I have been alone up in that cabin for 5 years. 5 years of nothing but silence and my own thoughts. And yesterday, talking to you, walking with you, I realized something. I am tired of being alone. I am tired of acting like I died along with my wife and son. I am not ready to love again, might never be ready for that, but maybe I can at least start living again. And if I can help someone in the process, someone who deserves better than the hand life has dealt her, then that seems like a good enough reason to try." Laura was silent for so long that Gideon thought she was going to refuse. Then she crossed the room and held out her hand. "Partners," she said. "Partners," Gideon agreed, taking her hand. Her grip was firm and warm, and the simple human contact sent an unexpected jolt through him. He released her hand quickly, suddenly aware of how long it had been since he had touched another person, how much he had missed even the most basic human warmth. They spent the rest of the day working side by side, falling into an easy rhythm that surprised them both. Gideon finished cutting and stacking firewood while Laura continued working the sluice. And in the evening they sat by the cabin and ate a simple dinner as the sun set behind the peaks. They talked about small things: the weather, the best hunting grounds, the politics of Hecla, and whether the railroad would ever make it this far north. Safe topics that let them learn about each other without exposing too much. Gideon rode back to his cabin that night feeling something he had not felt in years. Hope. It was a dangerous feeling, one that could hurt him worse than any physical injury, but he could not quite bring himself to crush it. For the first time since Margaret and Samuel died, he let himself imagine a future that held more than just solitude and survival. The next weeks fell into a pattern. Gideon would ride to Laura's claim in the morning, and they would work together until evening. He taught her better techniques for working the sluice, how to read the creek and find the places where gold was likely to settle. She showed him the maps her father had made, the theories he had about where the main vein might run. Together they made improvements to the claim, building a better sluice, digging test holes in promising locations, strengthening the cabin against the next winter. They found small amounts of gold, nothing spectacular but enough to be encouraging. More importantly, they found something else: companionship, friendship, a growing ease with each other that made the hard work bearable and the evenings pleasant. They began to share meals regularly, trading stories about their pasts. Laura told him about growing up in Kansas, about her mother's death when she was 15, about coming west with her father and learning to mine and pan, and survive in a landscape that wanted them dead. Gideon told her about his life before the fever, about his childhood in Ohio, about Margaret and how they had met and fallen in love and planned a future together. "You still love her?" Laura asked one evening as they sat outside the cabin watching the stars emerge. "Always," Gideon said. "But it is different now. The pain has dulled to an ache. I can think about her without wanting to die myself. That is progress, I suppose." "I think she would want you to be happy," Laura said quietly. "To live, not just survive. Maybe. But knowing what someone would want and being able to do it are two different things." Laura was quiet for a moment, then said, "My father told me something before he died. He said grief is just love with nowhere to go. That missing someone is not a bad thing because it means you loved them, and love is always worth the pain." She looked at Gideon. "I think he was right. I miss him every day, but I would not trade the years I had with him just to avoid the pain of losing him." Gideon felt something shift in his chest, a cracking sensation like ice breaking up in a spring river. "Your father was a wise man. He had his moments." As spring turned to summer, Gideon found himself spending more and more time at Laura's claim and less at his own cabin. He told himself it was because they were partners, because the work required his presence, but he knew the truth was more complicated. He enjoyed being around Laura, enjoyed her dry sense of humor, her stubborn determination, the way she never complained even when the work was backbreaking and the progress minimal. She made him feel human again, made him remember what it was like to care about someone beyond himself. It scared him more than he wanted to admit. One afternoon in late June, they made a discovery that changed everything. Laura had been working a new section of the creek when she called out excitedly. Gideon dropped his shovel and ran to her side. "Look," she said, holding out her pan. The bottom was covered in gold flakes, more than Gideon had ever seen from the claim before. "Where did you pull this from?" "Right there." Laura pointed to a spot where a rock shelf jutted into the creek. "I moved those rocks and started digging underneath, and this is what I found." Gideon felt his heart begin to race. This could be it. This could be the strike your father was looking for. They spent the next week carefully working that section of the creek, and the gold kept coming. Not in massive quantities like the stories of the big strikes, but steadily, predictably, enough to make a real difference. By the end of the week, they had pulled out nearly $300 worth of gold, more than Laura had found in the previous 6 months combined. "We did it," Laura said, staring at the small pouch of gold dust in her hands. "We actually did it." "You did it," Gideon corrected. This is your claim, your father's dream. I am just helping." "No." Laura looked up at him, her eyes bright with tears. "We did this together. Without you, I would have given up months ago. I would have starved or frozen or just walked away from it all. You saved me, Gideon. You saved this claim and you saved my life." "Laura." He did not know what to say, could not find words adequate to the feeling swelling in his chest. She stepped closer to him, close enough that he could smell the creek water and pine sap that clung to her hair. "I need to tell you something. These past months, working with you, getting to know you, I have felt something I did not think I would ever feel. I did not come out here looking for love or romance or anything like that. I just wanted to survive. But then you walked into that general store and offered to help me, and everything changed. Laura, I do not think." Gideon started, but she put a finger to his lips. "Let me finish, please." She took a breath. "I know you are not ready. I know you are still healing from losing your wife and son. I am not asking you for anything you cannot give, but I need you to know that I care about you, more than I should, probably, more than is wise. You have given me hope and purpose and joy, and I am grateful for that, whether or not you can return my feelings." Gideon stood frozen, torn between the urge to run and the urge to pull her close. Everything in him wanted to protect himself, to maintain the walls he had built so carefully over 5 years of solitude. But looking at Laura, seeing the vulnerability and courage in her face, he realized something important. He was already past the walls. Somehow, without his permission or conscious awareness, Laura had slipped past all his defenses. He cared about her, more than cared. He looked forward to seeing her each morning. He thought about her in the evenings when he rode back to his cabin. He worried about her when storms rolled in, worried that she would not have enough firewood or food or warmth. He found excuses to make her laugh. He felt proud when she succeeded and protective when she struggled. "I am scared," he said finally, the words dragged up from somewhere deep inside. "I swore I would never care about anyone again, that I would never risk that kind of pain. But I think it is too late for that. I think I already care about you, and that terrifies me." "I am scared too," Laura whispered, "but I think being scared means it matters. And something that matters is worth the risk." Gideon reached up and touched her cheek, feeling the warmth of her skin, the reality of her. She leaned into his touch, and he felt the last of his resistance crumble. "You make me want to believe again," he said. "In hope, in second chances, in the possibility that life might hold something more than just surviving." "Then believe," Laura said. "Take a chance on me, on us. I promise I will be worth it." He kissed her then, softly at first, then with growing intensity as 5 years of isolation and grief and loneliness finally broke apart. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck, and for the first time since Margaret died, Gideon felt something other than emptiness. He felt alive, connected, home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Laura smiled up at him. "So does this mean we are more than just business partners?" "I suppose it does." Gideon tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Though I have to warn you, I am probably going to be terrible at this. I have forgotten how to court a woman properly. I am not interested in proper courting. I am interested in honest feelings and real partnership and building something meaningful together." Laura took his hand. "Can you give me that? I can try. That is all I am asking." They stood together as the sun set, hands clasped, watching the mountains turn gold and then purple in the fading light. Gideon felt something loosen in his chest, some knot of tension he had been carrying for so long he had forgotten it was there. Laura leaned against his shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "What happens now?" she asked. "I suppose we keep working the claim. Keep finding gold. Keep figuring this out as we go." Sounds like a good plan. The rest of the summer was the happiest Gideon could remember since before the fever. He and Laura worked the claim by day and spent their evenings together, talking and laughing and slowly building the foundation of something real. He moved some of his belongings down from his cabin, essentially living at Laura's place more than his own. They were careful to maintain the appearance of propriety when they went to town, but in the privacy of the mountains, they were simply two people learning to love again. The gold strike continued to produce, not enough to make them wealthy but enough to provide real security. They upgraded their equipment, improved the cabin, and began to plan for the future. Gideon found himself thinking in terms of years instead of days, imagining winters spent snug in the cabin with Laura, springs working the claim together, summers exploring the mountains they both loved. In late August, he rode to town alone and returned with a ring. It was a simple gold band, nothing fancy, but it had cost him a significant portion of his share of the gold, and he thought it was perfect. He found Laura working by the creek, her skirt hiked up and her feet bare in the water, and his heart swelled with love for this tough, determined woman who had somehow convinced him to live again. "Laura Mason," he said, and she looked up in surprise. "You are back early." "I did not expect you until evening. I had something important to do in town." He climbed down from Ulysses and walked to the creek's edge. Then, feeling suddenly nervous, he dropped to one knee in the mud. "Laura, I came out to these mountains 5 years ago because I did not want to feel anything anymore. I thought I was done with living, done with caring, done with everything that made life worth living. And then I met you and you changed everything. You made me believe in second chances. You made me want to wake up in the morning. You made me realize that loving someone and losing them does not mean you can never love again. It just means you understand how precious and rare real love is." Laura's hands were pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "I love you," Gideon continued. "I love your strength and your stubbornness, and the way you never give up no matter how hard things get. I love that you made me help you even when you did not want to accept help. I love working beside you every day and falling asleep beside you every night. And I want to spend the rest of my life doing exactly that if you will have me. So, Laura Mason, will you marry me?" "Yes," Laura said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and she pulled him up into a fierce embrace. They stood together in the creek, water rushing around their legs and the sun warm on their faces, and Gideon felt a peace he had thought he would never feel again. They were married in September in a simple ceremony in Hecla. The preacher performed the service, and a handful of townspeople stood as witnesses. And afterward they celebrated with a modest dinner at the town's only restaurant. Laura wore a new dress she had bought with her share of the gold, a pretty blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and Gideon wore his cleanest shirt and a new vest. They were both grinning like fools the entire day, unable to contain the joy that seemed to overflow from every interaction. The ride back to the claim that evening felt different. It was not just Laura's place anymore, or Gideon's by extension. It was their home, the place where they would build their life together. That night, in the privacy of their cabin, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness that brought tears to both their eyes. Gideon had thought he would never feel this kind of intimacy again, this complete connection to another human being, and the reality of it was almost overwhelming. "I love you," Laura whispered in the darkness, curled against his chest. "I love you too," Gideon replied, and meant it with every fiber of his being. The first year of their marriage was not easy, but it was good. They worked the claim through the fall, pulling out enough gold to see them through the winter comfortably. When the first snows came in November, They were well prepared with plenty of firewood, ample supplies, and each other for warmth and company. The winter was long and harsh, but Gideon found he did not mind being snowed in the way he had in previous years. With Laura beside him, the cabin felt cozy rather than confining. They spent the long evenings reading aloud to each other, playing cards, making love, and planning for the spring. "I think we should build a bigger cabin," Laura said one night in January as they lay in bed listening to the wind howl outside. "This one is fine for two, but what if we have children? We will need more space." Children. The word made Gideon's chest tighten with a mixture of hope and fear. He had not let himself think about having another child, had not dared to imagine replacing Samuel in any way. But Laura was right. If they were building a life together, children would be a natural part of that life. "You want children?" he asked carefully. "I do. Not right away necessarily, but someday." Laura propped herself up on her elbow to look at him. "I know it is complicated for you. I know you lost a son and that pain never really goes away, but I hope that someday you might be ready to try again, to be a father again." Gideon was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Samuel, about Margaret, about all the hopes and dreams that had died with them. But he also thought about Laura, about the future they were building, about the idea of a child with her eyes and his stubbornness. "I think I would like that," he said finally. "Not to replace Samuel, nothing could ever do that, but to honor his memory by living fully, by building the family I always wanted. Yes, I think I would like that very much." Laura kissed him softly. "Then we will build a bigger cabin in the spring." When the snow finally melted in April, they began work on the new cabin. Gideon designed it to be twice the size of the old one, with a separate bedroom and space for a growing family. They worked on it between sessions at the claim, and by midsummer they had the walls up and the roof on. Friends from town came out to help with a barn raising of sorts, and Laura cooked for everyone while the men worked. It felt good to be part of a community again, to have neighbors who cared whether they succeeded or failed. The claim continued to produce steadily through that summer and into the fall. They were not getting rich, but they were making a good living, better than many in the area. More importantly, they were happy. Gideon woke up each morning grateful for another day with Laura, another chance to work beside her and laugh with her and love her. In October, Laura told him she was pregnant. Gideon's first reaction was fear, pure and primal. He thought of Margaret and the fever, of Samuel's tiny body in his arms, of the gut-wrenching pain of losing them both. He thought of all the ways childbirth could go wrong on the frontier, all the dangers that could take Laura from him. "Gideon," Laura said, concerned by the look on his face. "Are you all right?" "I am terrified," he admitted. "What if something goes wrong? What if I lose you?" Laura took his hands in hers. "Nothing is going to go wrong. I am strong and healthy, and we have months to prepare. We will get the doctor from Hecla when the time comes, and everything will be fine." "You cannot promise that." "No, I cannot. But I can promise that I will fight with everything I have to stay with you, and I can promise that our child will be lucky to have you as a father." She placed his hand on her still flat belly. "This is a good thing, Gideon. A wonderful thing. Let yourself be happy about it." He tried. Over the following weeks and months, as Laura's belly grew and the reality of the baby became undeniable, Gideon worked hard to embrace the joy instead of dwelling on the fear. He built a cradle from pine wood and sanded it until it was smooth as silk. He went to town and bought soft flannel for baby clothes. He prepared the cabin for winter with even more care than usual, making sure every crack was chinked and every supply was stocked. Laura bloomed with pregnancy, her face glowing and her spirit bright. She continued to work as long as she was able, insisting that she was not fragile just because she was carrying a child. Gideon learned to bite his tongue when he wanted to protect her, to trust that she knew her own limits and would respect them. The baby came in early June of 1880, after a long labor that left Gideon pacing and praying and bargaining with God. The doctor from town had come up 2 weeks earlier and stayed at a neighbor's claim, ready to assist when the time came. When Gideon finally heard the thin wail of a newborn, he nearly collapsed with relief. "It is a boy," the doctor announced, emerging from the bedroom with a red-faced, squalling infant wrapped in flannel. "A healthy boy, about 8 pounds, I would say, and your wife did beautifully. She is tired but well." Gideon took the baby with shaking hands, staring down at the tiny face with wonder and terror. His son, his and Laura's. A perfect, miraculous blend of both of them. The baby had Laura's fair coloring but Gideon's nose and chin. As Gideon watched, the infant opened his eyes, revealing a dark blue that would probably lighten to green or gray. "Hello," Gideon whispered. "I am your father." Laura called from the bedroom, her voice weak but happy. "Bring him here. I want to see him." Gideon carried the baby to her, and Laura's face lit up when she saw them both. She looked exhausted, her hair damp with sweat and her face pale, but she had never been more beautiful to him. "He is perfect," she said, taking the baby and cradling him against her chest. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names over the winter, but Gideon had been superstitious about choosing one too early. Now, looking at his wife and son, he knew what felt right. "Samuel," he said, "if that is all right with you. Not to replace my first son, but to honor his memory and acknowledge that love does not die, it just grows to include more people." Laura's eyes filled with tears. "Samuel, it is perfect." Little Samuel was a good baby, healthy and strong. He nursed well and slept in reasonable stretches, and as the summer progressed, he grew plump and happy. Gideon found himself constantly amazed by fatherhood the second time around. He had been young and overwhelmed when Samuel the first was born, barely more than a boy himself. Now he was older, more settled, and able to appreciate every moment. He loved the weight of the baby in his arms, the milky smell of him, the way his tiny hand would curl around Gideon's finger with surprising strength. Laura recovered well from the birth and insisted on returning to light work within weeks, though Gideon had taken over most of the heavy labor at the claim. They had saved enough money that they did not need to push as hard, could afford to focus on their family and their home. The claim would be there when they were ready to work it more intensely. By the time Samuel was 6 months old, Gideon could hardly remember what life had been like before Laura. The pain of losing Margaret and the first Samuel had not disappeared, but it had transformed into something gentler, a bittersweet memory rather than an open wound. He thought of them often, especially when he held his son, but now he could smile when he remembered them instead of only feeling sorrow. One evening in late autumn, with Samuel asleep in his cradle and a fire crackling in the stove, Laura looked across the table at Gideon and said, "I need to tell you something." Gideon felt a flutter of anxiety. "What is it? Do you remember that day in the general store? When you paid for my flour, of course. I almost did not accept your help. I was so proud, so determined to do everything myself. I told myself I was nobody special, that I did not deserve kindness from strangers." Laura reached across the table and took his hand. "But you told me I was special enough to make you believe again. Do you remember that?" "I remember." "I did not understand what you meant at the time. I thought it was just something kind you said to make me feel better. But now I understand. You saw something in me that I could not see in myself. You saw strength and value and worth. You saw someone who deserved help and partnership and love. And by seeing me that way, you made me believe in myself. You gave me back my hope, my purpose, my life. You made me believe that I was special, that I mattered, that I deserved good things." Gideon felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Laura, let me finish," she said gently. "What I am trying to say is thank you. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. Thank you for helping me when I was too stubborn to ask. Thank you for loving me when I did not think I deserved to be loved. You gave me everything, Gideon. A home, a family, a future. You gave me yourself, and I want you to know that I see you too. I see the pain you carry and the courage it takes to love again. I see the good man you are, the father and husband and partner. And I am honored every single day that you chose me." "I will always choose you," Gideon said, standing and pulling her into his arms. "Every day, every moment for the rest of my life. You are not nobody special, Laura Shaw. You are everything. You are my second chance, my proof that life goes on, my reason to wake up in the morning. I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." They held each other in the warmth of their cabin, their son sleeping peacefully nearby, the mountains standing guard outside. It was not the life Gideon had imagined when he first came to Montana 5 years earlier. It was better, richer, fuller, real. The years that followed were good ones. They continued to work the claim, finding enough gold to live comfortably without the backbreaking labor that had characterized Laura's early years. They expanded their cabin again when Laura became pregnant with their second child, a daughter they named Marguerite after Gideon's first wife. 2 years later came another son, Joseph, and 2 years after that a second daughter, Catherine. The cabin on Ramshorn Creek became known throughout the area as a place of hospitality and kindness. Gideon and Laura welcomed travelers, helped neighbors in need, and built a reputation as good people in a hard land. They taught their children to value hard work, honesty, and compassion. They told stories about those who had come before, keeping the memory of Margaret and the first Samuel alive, honoring Laura's father and all the sacrifices that had brought them to this place. Samuel grew into a strong, thoughtful boy who loved the mountains as much as his parents did. He learned to pan for gold and chop wood and track animals through the forest. Marguerite was quick and clever, with her mother's determination and her father's dry humor. Joseph was the adventurous one, always climbing trees and exploring caves and giving his parents heart attacks with his fearlessness. Catherine, the baby, was gentle and observant, the peacemaker of the family. Gideon never forgot the darkness that had driven him into the mountains, never forgot the pain of loss and grief. But alongside that darkness now existed light, joy, love, and life. He had learned that the human heart was more resilient than he had imagined, that it could break and heal and break again and still find the strength to love. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Gideon and Laura rode up to a high meadow they had discovered years earlier. They left the children with a neighbor and spent the day alone together, something that was rare and precious with 4 young ones at home. They brought a picnic and a blanket and lay in the grass watching clouds drift across the endless blue sky. "You ever regret it?" Laura asked, her head pillowed on his shoulder. "Giving up your solitude, taking a chance on me in all this chaos," Gideon laughed. "Not for a single moment." "Well, maybe for a moment when all 4 children are crying at once and the cabin is a disaster and I cannot remember what silence sounds like. But even then, not really. This life with you, this family we have built, it is worth every challenge." "I used to think I was nobody special," Laura said quietly. "Just another poor prospector's daughter trying to survive in a harsh world, but you made me see that I was wrong. We are all special in our own way. We all matter. We all deserve love and happiness and second chances." "You are definitely special," Gideon said, kissing the top of her head. "The most special woman I have ever known. You took a broken man and taught him how to live again. That is no small thing. We healed each other, Laura corrected. That is what love does. It takes two broken people and makes them whole. They lay together in comfortable silence, watching the mountains and the sky and feeling the warmth of the sun on their faces. Somewhere below, their children were laughing and playing. Somewhere deeper in the mountains, Gideon's old cabin stood empty, a monument to the man he used to be. And here in this meadow, with Laura beside him and a life full of love and purpose stretching out before them, Gideon felt a contentment so profound, it brought tears to his eyes. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For walking into that general store on that spring day, for being stubborn enough to accept my help, for giving me a reason to believe again." He turned to face her, cupping her cheek in his hand. "You saved my life, Laura. In every way that matters, you saved my life." "And you saved mine," she replied. "I guess that makes us even." "I guess it does." They kissed in the high meadow, the mountains bearing witness to their love, and Gideon thought about how strange and wonderful life was. How it could take everything from you and then, when you least expected it, give you everything back in a different form. How loss and love were two sides of the same coin, how you could not truly appreciate one without experiencing the other. He thought about the man he had been when he first came to these mountains, hollow and haunted and convinced he was done with living. That man would not recognize the life Gideon had now. That man would be amazed and grateful and probably a little scared by all this joy. But that man was gone, transformed by love and time and the patient kindness of a woman who had seen worth in him when he could not see it in himself. As they rode back down to the cabin that evening, Gideon made a silent promise to Margaret and the first Samuel. He promised to live fully, to love deeply, to honor their memory by building the life they never got to have. He promised to be the husband and father they would have wanted him to be. And he promised never to forget that love was always worth the risk, always worth the pain, because in the end it was the only thing that truly mattered. The children ran to greet them when they arrived home, clamoring for attention and stories about their day. Laura scooped up Catherine while Gideon lifted Joseph onto his shoulders, and they all walked into the cabin together, a noisy, chaotic, perfect family. That night, after the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Gideon and Laura sat by the fire and talked about the future. "I think we should expand the claim next year," Laura said. "Maybe bring in some hired help so we can work a larger area. Samuel is getting old enough to help too." "Slow down," Gideon said with a smile. "He is only 10. I was working a claim at 10. That was different. That was survival. This is choice." Laura nodded, accepting the distinction. "All right, but I still think we should expand. We have been playing it safe for years now. Maybe it is time to take another chance, see what we are really capable of." "Whatever you want to do, I am with you," Gideon said. "We are partners, remember, in everything." "I remember." Laura leaned against him and he wrapped his arm around her. "Gideon." "Yes, I am happy, truly, deeply happy. I just wanted you to know that. I am happy too," he replied. "Happier than I ever thought I would be again. You did that. You and our children and this life we have built together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers, and Gideon felt a peace so complete it was almost overwhelming. This was what life was supposed to be. Not perfect, not without challenges or sorrows, but full of love and meaning and purpose. It was messy and complicated and sometimes exhausting, but it was real and it was theirs and it was enough. Years continued to pass in the Montana mountains. The claim proved more profitable than they had hoped, enough that they were able to hire help and expand their operation significantly. The children grew strong and capable, learning the skills they would need to survive and thrive in the wilderness. Samuel showed a talent for engineering, designing better equipment and more efficient ways to work the claim. Marguerite developed an interest in medicine and began apprenticing with the doctor in Hecla. Joseph remained the adventurer, trapping and hunting and exploring every corner of the territory. Catherine became a teacher, starting a small school in their cabin during the winter months for the children of neighboring families. Gideon and Laura grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They knew each other's thoughts, finished each other's sentences, moved through their days with the synchronized grace of long partnership. There were hard times, of course. A daughter stillborn in 1885, a fire that destroyed part of the claim in 1887, a winter so harsh in 1889 that they nearly ran out of food. But they weathered each storm together, their love proving stronger than any challenge. In the spring of 1900, 22 years after they had first met in the general store in Hecla, Gideon and Laura stood on the porch of their cabin and surveyed the life they had built. 4 children grown and building their own lives, though all still close by. A claim that had provided well for them over the years, a cabin that had sheltered them through countless seasons, a love that had endured and grown and become the foundation for everything else. "We did all right," Laura said, taking Gideon's hand. Her hair was gray now, and lines creased her face, but to Gideon she was as beautiful as the day he had first seen her. "Better than all right," Gideon replied. His own hair was more silver than brown and his back ached more than it used to, but he felt young when he looked at Laura. "We built something real, something lasting." "I still remember what you said to me that first day," Laura said, "when I tried to refuse your help in the store. What did I say? You said I looked like someone who pays her debts, and I have, you know, I paid you back for that flower." "You did indeed, with interest," Laura laughed. "But there is one debt I can never fully repay, the debt I owe you for helping me believe that I was special, that I mattered, that my life had value and purpose. Laura." Gideon turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "You do not owe me anything. You gave me everything back and more. You made me believe again. In love, in life, in second chances, in all of it. I was a dead man when I walked into that store and you brought me back to life. So if anyone owes a debt, it is me." "Then I guess we are both in debt to each other," Laura said, "and I guess we will spend the rest of our lives paying it off. I guess we will." Gideon pulled her close, holding her against his chest the way he had done 1,000 times before. "I love you, Laura Shaw. More today than yesterday and less than I will tomorrow." "I love you too," Laura murmured against his shoulder. "My mountain man, my partner, my second chance." They stood together as the sun rose over the mountains, painting the world in shades of gold and rose. Somewhere in the valley below, their children were starting their days. Somewhere in the past, the people they had been before they met were smiling. And here, in this moment, 2 people who had found each other against all odds held tight to the love they had built and knew that they were blessed beyond measure. Samuel and Marguerite visited that evening with their own children, 5 grandchildren in total who brought chaos and joy in equal measure. The cabin filled with noise and laughter, and Laura cooked a massive dinner while Gideon told stories to the grandchildren. They sat around the table long after the meal was finished, talking and joking and simply being together. As the evening drew to a close and the visitors prepared to leave, young Samuel, now a man of 21 with his own mining operation, pulled Gideon aside. "I wanted to ask you something," he said. "There is a woman in town, Emily Johnson. Her father owns the feed store. I have been courting her for a few months now, and I think she might be the one. How did you know Mother was the one?" Gideon thought about the question, about the day he had met Laura and the years that had followed. I knew because she made me want to be better than I was. She made me want to try again, to live again, to love again. And I knew because when I thought about my future without her, it felt empty and wrong. That is how I feel about Emily, Samuel said. Like she completes something in me I did not know was incomplete. Then you have your answer, Gideon said, clapping his son on the shoulder. Go after her. Do not let fear hold you back. Life is too short and love is too precious to waste time being cautious. Samuel grinned. I plan to ask her father's permission next week. I just wanted to talk to you first to make sure I was not being foolish. Love is always a little foolish, Gideon said. But it is the best kind of foolishness there is. After everyone had left and the cabin was quiet again, Gideon found Laura sitting by the fire, a soft smile on her face. Samuel is going to propose to Emily, he said, settling into the chair beside her. I know, she is a good girl. They will be happy together. Laura reached for his hand. We are going to be great-grandparents before we know it. The world keeps turning, Gideon said. Children grow up, families expand, life goes on. It does indeed. Laura was quiet for a moment, then said, Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not walked into that store that day? If you had just bought your supplies and left without helping me? All the time, Gideon admitted. I think about the man I was, the path I was on. I would have gone back to my cabin and stayed there, alone and miserable, until I died or went crazy from isolation. I would have wasted the rest of my life hiding from the world instead of living in it. And I would have starved or given up or married some other prospector out of desperation, Laura said. We both would have lived half lives, shadows of what we could have been. But that is not what happened. We found each other, we saved each other, and we built this. Gideon gestured around the cabin at the evidence of their life together. We built something real and good and lasting, and no matter what happens from here, no one can take that away from us. Laura leaned her head on his shoulder. I used to think I was nobody special. Just another poor girl trying to survive. But you made me see the truth. We are all special in our own way, we all have value, we all deserve love and happiness. You are special, Gideon said firmly. You always were, I just helped you see it. They sat together in the firelight, two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment, who had taken a chance on love when it would have been safer to walk away. They had built a life together through hard work and determination and unwavering commitment. They had created a family, a home, a legacy that would outlive them both. As the fire burned low and the cabin grew cool, they prepared for bed with the comfortable routine of long marriage. Gideon banked the fire while Laura checked that all the windows were latched. They changed into night clothes and climbed into the bed they had shared for over 2 decades, fitting together as naturally as two puzzle pieces. Gideon, Laura said in the darkness. Yes. Thank you for taking a chance on me all those years ago. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. Thank you for loving me even when you thought you could never love again. Thank you for being stubborn enough to let me help you, Gideon replied. Thank you for being brave enough to love a broken man. Thank you for giving me a reason to believe again. We did well, did we not? We did extraordinarily well. They fell asleep in each other's arms, and Gideon dreamed of mountains and gold dust, and a woman with winter blue eyes who had saved his life by letting him save hers. He dreamed of children and grandchildren and a legacy of love that would ripple out through generations. He dreamed of second chances and new beginnings and the miracle of healing. When he woke in the morning, Laura was already up, making coffee and humming a tune he did not recognize. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust motes in the air and painting everything in warm gold. Gideon lay in bed for a moment, watching his wife move around their cabin, and felt a gratitude so profound it brought tears to his eyes. This was grace. This was redemption. This was proof that no matter how dark life became, there was always the possibility of light. That no matter how broken you felt, there was always the chance to heal. That no matter how alone you were, there was always the possibility of connection. You going to lie there all day, or are you going to get up and help me with the day's work? Laura called, catching him watching her. I am coming, Gideon said, climbing out of bed with a groan as his aging joints protested. Though I think you just like bossing me around. After 22 years, I think I have earned the right, Laura replied with a grin. They spent the day working side by side as they had done for over 2 decades, their movements synchronized by long practice. The claim still produced, though they worked it more for something to do than out of necessity these days. They had more than enough money saved, and their children were all established in their own lives. But the work gave them purpose and kept them active and provided a framework for their days. In the evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, Gideon reflected on the strange and wonderful path his life had taken. If someone had told him back in 1878 that he would find love again, that he would have 4 children and 5 grandchildren and counting, that he would spend his days happy and content in the Montana mountains, he would have laughed in disbelief. But life had surprised him in the best possible way. What are you thinking about? Laura asked. How lucky I am. How grateful I am for every moment of this life we have built together. I am grateful too, Laura said. For you, for our children, for this beautiful place we call home. For every single day we have had together, and every day still to come. They held hands as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, and Gideon thought about the words Laura had spoken all those years ago in the general store. She had whispered that she was nobody special, and he had told her she was special enough to make him believe again. At the time, he had not fully understood the weight of those words, the promise they contained. But now, with decades of love and life between them, he understood completely. Laura had been special enough to make him believe again. Believe in love. Believe in hope. Believe in the possibility of happiness after devastating loss. She had been special enough to pull him back from the edge of despair and show him that life still held joy and meaning and purpose. She had been special enough to heal his broken heart and teach him that loving again did not mean forgetting what he had lost. It just meant opening himself to what he could gain. And in helping him believe again, she had saved not just his life but his soul. The years that followed were good ones, filled with the quiet contentment of long partnership. They watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated as Samuel married Emily and started his own family, rejoiced when Marguerite completed her medical training and became the first female doctor in the territory. Joseph explored the wilderness and eventually settled down with a woman as adventurous as himself. Catherine's school grew and thrived, educating dozens of children over the years. Gideon and Laura grew old together with grace, their love deepening and maturing like fine wine. They had their share of aches and pains, the inevitable decline that came with age, but they faced it together with humor and patience. When Gideon's knees started giving out, and he could no longer work the claim as he once had, Laura did not complain, just adjusted their routine to match his capabilities. When Laura's eyesight began to fail, and she could no longer do the fine handwork she loved, Gideon read aloud to her every evening, the same way she had read to him in their early days together. In the summer of 1910, on their 32nd wedding anniversary, they threw a party at the cabin for their entire extended family. Children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren filled the clearing, 3 generations of the family they had built together. There was music and laughter and more food than anyone could possibly eat. As the day drew to a close and the youngest children were falling asleep in their parents' arms, Gideon stood and raised his cup. "I want to make a toast," he said, his voice still strong despite his 75 years. "To Laura, the woman who saved my life. To our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the proof that love endures. To this beautiful land that has been our home for over 3 decades. And to all of you for being here to celebrate with us. We are blessed beyond measure and we know it." "To family," everyone echoed, raising their cups. Laura stood beside Gideon, tears streaming down her face, and added her own toast. "To second chances, to believing in love even when it seems impossible. To the man who saw value in me when I could not see it in myself. And to all of you who make every day worth living. I love you all more than words can express." As the party wound down and people began to leave, making their way down the mountain in the fading light, Gideon and Laura stood together watching them go. Their oldest grandson, young Samuel's eldest son, hung back to help clean up. "Grandfather," he said as he stacked dishes, "would you tell me the story again, about how you and grandmother met?" Gideon smiled. This grandson, named Gideon after him, had always been fascinated by the family history. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. How did you know she was the one? How did you find the courage to love again after losing so much?" Gideon and Laura exchanged glances, a lifetime of understanding passing between them in a single look. Then Gideon began to speak, telling the story of a man who had given up on life and a woman who had helped him find his way back. He told of chance meetings and stubborn pride, of partnership and friendship that grew into something more. He told of fear and courage and the decision to risk everything for love. Young Gideon listened intently, and when the story was finished, he said, "I hope I find someone like that someday. Someone who makes me want to be better, who sees the best in me even when I cannot see it myself." "You will," Laura said with certainty. "Love has a way of finding us when we need it most. Your grandfather and I are proof of that." After young Gideon left, Gideon and Laura prepared for bed one final time, their movements slow but synchronized. They had lived a good life, a full life, a life rich with love and meaning. As they lay down together in the bed they had shared for over 3 decades, Laura turned to Gideon with a peaceful smile. "I would do it all again," she said. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy and sorrow. I would choose you and this life 1,000 times over." "As would I," Gideon replied, pulling her close. "You were my second chance, Laura. My proof that life goes on, that love endures, that broken people can heal and find happiness again. You taught me that believing again was not just possible but necessary, that hiding from life was not the answer to pain, living was." "We taught each other," Laura corrected gently. "That is what love does. It heals and strengthens and transforms. It takes 2 imperfect people and makes something perfect between them." They fell asleep in each other's arms, and when morning came, they woke together to begin another day. There would be many more days to come, years of continued love and partnership and joy. They would face whatever the future brought with the same courage and commitment that had carried them through the past 3 decades. And when the time finally came for them to leave this world, they would go knowing that they had lived fully, loved completely, and built something lasting. They would go knowing that their love story, which had begun with a chance meeting in a general store in Hecla, Montana, had rippled out through generations, touching countless lives and proving that it was never too late for second chances. But that time was not yet. For now, there were mountains to admire and grandchildren to spoil and quiet evenings by the fire. There were stories to tell and memories to make and days to be lived in the presence of someone who made every moment worthwhile. There was love, pure and simple and real, the kind of love that made everything else possible. Laura had once whispered that she was nobody special, and Gideon had told her she was special enough to make him believe again. 32 years later, with a lifetime of evidence to support it, they both knew the truth. They were both special, not because of anything extraordinary they had done, but because they had chosen to love when it would have been easier to give up. Because they had chosen to believe when despair seemed more logical. Because they had chosen to build rather than break, to connect rather than isolate, to live rather than merely survive. That was the real miracle of their story. Not that they had found each other, though that was miraculous enough. Not that they had built a successful life together, though that too was worthy of celebration. The real miracle was that they had both been brave enough to try, to risk their hearts one more time, to believe that happiness was still possible even after devastating loss. And in the end, that belief had saved them both. The sun rose over the Montana mountains, painting the world in shades of gold and rose, and Gideon Shaw and Laura Mason Shaw stood on the porch of their cabin, hands clasped, hearts full, ready to face whatever the new day brought. Together. Always together. Because that was what love did. It took two incomplete people and made them whole. It took darkness and brought light. It took despair and created hope. And it was, in the end, the most special thing of all.